Hello and welcome to Ask an Author with Julia Kelly. I'm so glad that you guys are joining us again for another wonderful week of author interviews. I have a very special guest with me. Would you like to introduce yourself and the book that you're talking about this week?
Yeah, I love you. I am Kimberly Duffy. I write historical women's fiction for Bethany House. And my third book just released. It's called Every Word Unsaid. See my little bookmark. My daughter is reading it right now. She gets so excited when they come out. So she grabs the first release copy and starts reading it. And yeah, my first three books are set in primarily in India. So this is my last book set in India for the time being. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about this, partially because your cover is so eye-catching that I've been seeing it kind of bubbling up around for a while. And when I had the opportunity to actually interview you, I thought this is the perfect chance to sit down and chat about a really interesting book that I know before we started talking, I mentioned it just draws on a lot of fascinating parts of history and a lot of fascinating events. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what people can expect when they pick up this book.
Yeah, so you can expect a lot of lush descriptions because India is my favorite place in the world. And I don't know that you can really write a book about India not write in a way that immerses the readers there. So you can expect that. You can expect a ahead of her time heroine who maybe gets in a bit of trouble, mostly trouble for homemaking. But it's really a book about a woman finding her literal place in the world. Where does she belong? Augusta Travers is the heroine. She's running from her parents' disappointment, her family's disappointment, and societal expectations, and trying to find her place and what she's supposed to be doing with her life. And she ends up finding it in India, which is super surprising to her.
I think she's such an interesting character in part because she is, as you say, a woman ahead of her time. She has a very sort of dump you right into the action sort of beginning. She's on the road traveling. So what is she doing when she's out in the American West, I guess?
Yeah. The book starts off in the Badlands, the Dakotas, and she's kind of an early prototype travel writer. She's a photographer and a journalist, and she writes for a women's magazine called Ladies Weekly anonymously. Nobody knows who she is because her family is part of kind of upper society in New York, and it would not be considered an ideal thing for a woman of her station to do. So she travels. She puts herself kind of in dangerous situations sometimes to get the story. And she writes for this magazine, and her goal is to help women escape home and hearth for a minute while she writes about her adventures on the road.
She's such an interesting figure too, because she's not just writing about them, she's also photographing. And this is really the beginning of photography and travel photography as well, right?
Yeah, it is. This was and I was super excited to write about this because when I pitched this book, I knew I wanted her to be a photographer. I didn't realize she was going to be a writer for a little while, but I knew I wanted her to be a photographer, and I wasn't sure when to set that because I didn't know when that had actually started. And it starts right about maybe like a decade earlier than this, in the like late 80s. And it was a time of change. Like so much was changing for photography and for women. And so it seemed like a really exciting moment in history to put my character and explore.
So we have a quick clarifying question from Michelle. What time period does this take place? Just to
1897. Yeah, it's 1897.
So almost the turn of a different century.
Yep.
And when you talk about the change for women happening at the time, she's really at the forefront of this sort of adventure woman. And would you consider her in the stunt journalism world?
I've never even researched that. I don't know, maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is sort of the Nellie Bly's.
Oh, Nellie Bly. Yeah. So yeah, at the time, Nellie Bly and Isabella Bird, there were all these female writers who were traveling as well, and travel became more accessible during this time too. Like whereas before it would have taken months to cross an ocean, now things were going a lot faster. And then there was the telegram and just ways to communicate with people more easily. So yeah, women were kind of stepping out of the home at this point and really stepping into adventure and travel and photography. And actually, there was a huge movement with women in photography at this time. So she was stepped right into that.
But this is not necessarily something that her family finds the most proper for her. Can you give a bit of context of why is this a struggle for her? Why is she sort of running away from the sense of obligation back in the city?
Yeah, so her family started middle class when she was a child. she had a fairly typical happy childhood. She's a bit of a wild child and got in trouble a lot, but they were fairly happy. And then her father kind of hit it big with investments, and they were kind of catapulted in the society that she didn't wake up. It changed the dynamic of their family. And her parents were particularly just wanting to kind of climb up the social ladder. And her sisters kind of fell into that as well. And because she was so rebellious and independent and doing her own thing, she became the family black sheep and just rebelled. She resisted that. She wanted her life to return to what it was when she was a child, before all this social stuff started happening to her. She didn't fit.
Yeah, she's an interesting character because, as you say, there's a lot that's very admirable about her. She is a very modern feeling woman, but she doesn't fit with her time and with her family and what's going on in the society in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I kind of drew on my own personal experiences with that, just the way I was raised. I was raised in kind of a conservative environment. And I've always been really driven and direct. And part of that is being from New York, but part of that is just my innate personality. And I tried to draw from those experiences, knowing that I didn't quite fit. Maybe being a little bit outside of what was the realm of expectation for my community and my social atmosphere. And I wanted to really make her a little bit outside of what was expected. But at the time, this would have been extremely, like, just a difficult, challenging thing for her to put herself in these positions.
Well, I think one of the things that she certainly does that's outside of expectations is, as you mentioned, this book does, a lot of it does happen in India. And I don't know how much you want to share about how she gets there. But how is it that she finds herself in India, and where does she go? It's such a big country.
Yeah, it is. So she is at her sister's wedding, and it comes out who she is at the wedding, and there's a kind of a hubbub, and people are very judgmental toward that. And her parents kind of freak out and threaten to send her to her aunt's house in Chicago and kind of be under lock and key until her aunt can help her reemerge into society and find her a husband, which is not something she wants. And so she, instead of going to Chicago, she runs away, which is something that she does. She escapes to Pune, primarily in Pune, that the book is set. She does do a little bit of traveling around the north and south, but the book is mostly set in Pune. And she has friends there, childhood friends who had moved there after their parents' death. Specs, or his name is Gabriel. She calls him Specs because he wears glasses. But he is a missionary doctor, and then his sister lives there with him. And so she stops there to visit. She does a little bit of traveling, stops there to visit, and then it's supposed to be just, a stop along her trip. She's supposed to travel the whole country, but she falls in love in a couple different ways in Pune. She falls in love with the city and with her friends and with a particular friend, and ends up settling there.
And of course, the city itself is going through a really difficult period of time as well. She arrives and sort of thinks that the greeting she's going to receive is warm and fuzzy and exactly sort of as it has been in her mind, but that's not exactly what she gets when she shows up.
Yeah, Pune is kind of a city in turmoil at this point. A famine has rocked India. There were 24 famines between 1850 and 1899. And so she lands there in 1897, right at the tail end of one of the worst famines. Millions of people died in this area. And so the economy is really shaken. And then on top of that, at the tail end of this, the bubonic plague emerges. It's brought over from China in shipping vessels. And I think it started in Bombay, today's Mumbai, and then it traveled to Pune. And so 50% of the city has left. And the people who are left are either the very wealthy living in the cantonment. It was a military base. So they're living in the cantonment where there's less risk of developing plague because the houses are spread out, they're not made of the same materials, there's not overcrowding. And then the people who are too poor to leave. So she lands right in the middle of this plague. And then Gabriel, who's a doctor, is like, you can't be here. Right. This is awful. You're gonna die.
Which is the right reaction for him to have. He absolutely, she should not be there.
No, she shouldn't be there, but she has a habit of ending up in places where she shouldn't be. So. And then she's like, of course I'm here. And then she finds out some trauma that's affected her friend. And she's like, well, I'm definitely not leaving now. So she stays for a little bit.
I think it's so interesting that she is a character who at once is driven by ambition, as you say, but also a real lust for travel and a real need for travel that I think is a lot of people share today. I know people are going to ask whether this is a place that you were able to go to and to research. And I have a little sneak preview of the answer because we chatted a little bit beforehand. But were you compelled to go for a research trip, or do you have that background yourself?
Yeah, after high school, I went to India and lived there for a little while. I did nonprofit work there. It's where I met my husband. He's from Ohio. He worked in a different capacity with the organization we work with. And so I lived in mainly Bangalore for a little while. And then we did a little bit of traveling, but I hadn't been to Pune. And then I went back a couple of years ago for a few weeks in the summer with a different organization I volunteer with. And I was able to go to Mumbai, Calcutta, and then Nepal, Kathmandu. Spent a little bit of time in Kathmandu, which is beautiful. And it was such a treat. We were in there in August, I think, or late July. It was so hot. And then we went to Nepal, and the weather was just it was so nice. It was such a great way to end our trip because it was cool. And anyway, yeah, so I had a chance to go there. I've never actually been to Pune, which was concerning for me because I like writing about areas where I've been, but which made my second book, which is set mainly in Calcutta, it made it valuable to write just because you get a sense of a place when you're there. Even if you spend a little bit of time there, you get kind of the sense of this place. It settles in your spirit. And so I was really worried, but I happened to be talking to a friend, an acquaintance at one of my kids' classes, and she said her sister had lived in Pune for, I don't know, 15 years, something like that, a decade or 15 years. And so she connected me with her, and I was able to ask her a bunch of questions and talk to her. And then my sensitivity reader has been to Pune, so she was a help too.
Wonderful. So you had a bit of in-person research, but also some sources helping you out.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first started writing though, I was kind of like, I don't know what it's like. Like I was watching YouTube videos, and I love to research, and I like things to be right, so I was like, I don't know if I can do this, but it was so helpful to have them.
What was it about that particular city in that area of India that you decided you were going to set this book there?
Well, originally I thought I would set it in the north, maybe Jaipur or Udaipur, just because those cities are so incredibly beautiful, and I was really attracted to writing scenes set there because I knew that I could just lyrically I could make the prose really beautiful with those settings. And I never actually even heard of Pune at that point. And then I realized I had to, so I went to the George Eastman Museum in upstate New York, and I handled some of the cameras that Gussie would have handled. And I realized I had to move up my timeline by 10 years because the camera that she would have brought, she would have had to travel with trunks and trunks of material. And I was like, that's kind of cumbersome. They're right. I don't really want to do that. So I decided to move it up into 1897 when the Kodak folding pocket camera came out, because this was really, truly the first travel camera. And she would have been able to travel easily with it and just send the film back, to be developed or develop it there and send the pictures back to her editor. And so it seemed like an easier thing to do. And then when I moved it up, I realized that I would be able to set it in the same place where one of my personal heroes, Pandita Ramabai Saraswati, lived. And so she lived in Pune at the time. So that's why I decided to move it to Pune, because I really wanted to put Pandita Ramabai in my book.
So can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Yeah. So she was an early Indian feminist and social, she worked in the social areas, and she worked for women's rights and girls' education and widows' rights. And she started out, she was born in a Brahmin family, which is kind of an upper caste family, and her father was a well-known Hindu scholar. And her parents died when she was young, and so she would travel around the country with her brother. And she was the first woman to be named, given the honorific of Pandita, which means basically it's a Hindu scholar who is particularly adept at Sanskrit and religion and philosophy. And so she was the first woman to be given this title. And then she did a ton of traveling. She went to England thinking she would become a doctor. Before she went to England, she started an organization with other upper caste women to fight for the rights for girls to go to school. She was way ahead of her time. And so she went to England. She realized the doctor thing wasn't going to work out. She'd started going deaf. I actually couldn't find any information. I found one line that she'd started going deaf, and that was what kept her from pursuing medicine. But I couldn't find any other information. Like, how bad was it? When did she go completely deaf? I found nothing. So I just decided to ignore that because I didn't know what to do. Sometimes you have to do that, right?
Right.
But I was like, I don't know how, I don't know the details about this. So I was like, well, we're just not going to talk about it. And then she traveled to the United States. She wrote a bunch of books on the lives of Hindu women. She did a lot of fundraising. She went back to Pune, and she started a home for child widows. And these women were trained, these girls really were trained as nurses. She would train them as nurses. She fought for the right for them to remarry, which at the time was legal. It was legal 1857, I think. The Widows and Remarriage Act was passed, 57 or 56. But it just wasn't done. Even though it was legal, it wasn't done. And so these women were really abused and neglected. The very bottom of society. And so she worked to rehabilitate them, counsel them, send them to school so that they could take care of themselves. And then after she had done that, the famine happened. And so she traveled around the city and outside the rural areas of India. She traveled around with a cart, and she would pick up children whose families had died of starvation and they were practically gone themselves. And she would pick them up, put them in the cart, and then bring them back to Sharada Sadan, which is the home she had started. Indian officials, it just started getting really crowded. There were too many kids. And so they told her that she had to stop. And so she built a home outside of rural, Pune, and it's called Mukti Mission. And there were hundreds and hundreds of kids that she saved and raised and educated. She was an amazing woman. She was way ahead of her time. Gussie was a little bit ahead of her time, but at the time in, the late 19th century, women's rights was really growing. Suffrage was a big cause, and women were leaving the home, starting to work, traveling around the world. They were being educated. And in India, none of that stuff was happening.
It's so interesting that you have these two characters from different cultures, from different countries, who are in some ways working towards some of the same things. The elevation of respect for women and giving women more agency, whether it's legal or within culture and within family. When did you decide that this was the right book to bring these two people together?
Well, I knew, like I said, I knew that I wanted Pandita in this book, and I just felt like, so their cultures are so different, right? But they were struggling against the same things. And it's just kind of a matter of degree, and I feel like that today, we still, in this country, there are still things that women are battling for. And then, I feel like that gives us an ability to relate somewhat to women in, nations where maybe they haven't come as far as far as women's rights concerned, but there's this connection between women where we can understand that and we can value those things and empathize with each other. And I just wanted to show the dichotomy, but also connected in some way. They're very connected because of their shared struggles. And we understand those differences and understand that maybe things are, for instance, in Afghanistan, things are much worse for women there. You can't even leave your house without, you can't go to work. You can't educate girls anymore. So there are those things, but I don't know, it's like this collective consciousness that we understand them in. So I want to show that. I want to show their friendships building. I have amazing Indian friendships, and these friendships, I try to put cross-cultural friendship in every one of my books, just because I want to honor them, these women, so much. These women made such an impact on my own life. I just want to honor them.
It's so interesting seeing those friendships develop, because again, you have these characters from very different backgrounds, and there's of course another woman who is a widow herself, a child widow. Can you tell us a little bit about her story and how she fits into this narrative?
Yeah, so her name is Bimla, and she was a child bride, which was fairly common back then. It's not near as common now. Sometimes in the rural areas, like the more isolated areas, you get that, but it's actually illegal now. But she was a child bride, and her husband died. So in India at the time, and really even to a certain extent today, widows, they were blamed for their husband's death. So, and because a woman would go and live with her in-laws, she would go and live with her family, her husband, his parents, his relatives. She was kind of separated from her own family. That relationship it's basically like, okay, now you're theirs, And so she was living with him and his parents. He died before she had any children. She was fairly young, and she was blamed for his death. The widows were considered bad luck. So even to look at one would be considered bad luck, like they were spreading that bad luck that killed their husband onto you. You weren't allowed to eat with the family, and they were starved, sometimes given one meal a day, abused, sexually, physically abused. They weren't allowed to wear saris and colors anymore. They had to wear white. In certain parts of India, referenced as it. She basically wasn't even human anymore. They lost that humanity. It was taken from them. You really were only human if you were married, right? And so because you were responsible for your husband's death, you were no longer human. You lost every bit of your identity. Your bangles were taken away, your jewelry was taken away, the bindi was taken away. And so she was in this position where she was being abused and marginalized and had lost everything. I mean, she had lost not only her husband, but her safety, her ability to survive, to eat, to protect herself. And so she goes back home to Pune to see if she can live with her parents again, because she knows she's going to die at some point if she stays there. And she's rejected by her family. And she kind of wanders around until Ramabai finds her and brings her to Sharada Sadan and trains her as a nurse. And well, she spent a little bit of time with her cousin who picked her up. To, she was used as kind of manual labor, and her cousin's wife viciously abused her.
I think her storyline was one of my favorites of the book in particular, because she intersects with other characters in really interesting ways. But she's a very quiet character, and a character who's obviously, for a lot of very good reasons, had her confidence taken away from her. She's lived a very difficult life, but she ends up being this real source of personal and internal strength throughout the book. Were you trying to sort of intentionally show the contrast between Gussie's situation? Gussie, I like Gussie a lot. I think, she has a lot of spunk. She's a really fun character, but she's also, in a weird sort of way, for a woman who's been who's traveled a lot in the United States, she is very sheltered. And I think her perspective on life and maybe the injustice that's been done to her as a young woman is very skewed towards her experience. So I felt like having this other character and having these other women that all of these women interact with, it kind of shone a light on their different experiences and how they moved through the world.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Gussie, I mean, she starts out extremely immature. She has these life experiences that don't they don't allow for her.
She's definitely impulsive.
She's definitely impulsive. Yeah, she's very young, and she has been very sheltered, and she doesn't understand the situation she's putting herself in. And she also doesn't have any understanding of what the world is actually like for women outside of her social situation. She's extremely privileged, and she doesn't recognize that, And so I wanted to show that contrast between, where she starts out and then where she ends in that moment when she recognizes that, and I feel as though I had that moment when I was a teenager, and I went to India, and I had no idea. Like, I grew up in Long Island, and it's a fairly wealthy area of the country. I wasn't, my father was a cop. I wasn't wealthy, but the area around me was, right? And I had no idea. And it was a shocking revelation to me that people still struggled like that. I was very sheltered. I hope I wasn't as immature as Gussie, but I was very sheltered. But that moment, like, I still remember that moment. I saw a leper on the street, and I just, the poverty, and, it was stunning revelation to me. Like, it changed me. I grew up in that moment. I went from being a child to being a person who understood that maybe my experience wasn't a global experience, right? And so I wanted to show that experience for Gussie. And so when I wrote Bimla, I purposely wrote Bimla to be completely opposite of Gussie in every way. And Bimla's entire experience has been one of real abuse, like real physical abuse. Gussie is verbally abused and neglected emotionally, but Bimla's entire story is real abuse, real physical abuse and violence. And yet she's this, like you said, this very quiet character, and it has affected her. She has to struggle through that growth as well. She has to grow and recognize her own value and worth isn't based in what she's been told too, just like Gussie does. But yeah, I wanted to write her in a way so that Gussie could then grow off her and learn from her. And Bimla, in her quietness and in her her sensitivity, shows Gussie like the truth of the matter and how the world really works. And maybe things aren't exactly the way you think they are. When you start to learn from other people's experiences, I think when you learn from other people's experiences, they just help you so much grow, more than even learning from your own experience.
I think you're right. And it's so interesting that some of these women are real women. And I read your author's note as well. And so I know that some of these women are fictional as well, but they have real grounding they feel grounded in terms of their experiences. How did you go about researching that for some of these characters where we don't have as much of a historical record? For instance, a character like Bimla, who widows maybe their experience wouldn't have been as well documented except through the widows' rights campaign that was going on during the time.
Yeah, thankfully Ramabai actually wrote, I mean, she wrote some books and she had papers written and stuff. And so I read those. And truth be told, widows are still struggling in India with the same issues. They're still abused, they're still neglected, they're kicked out of their homes, they're starving, they're forced into prostitution. And there are laws meant to protect them, but it's a very bureaucratic country and it's hard to follow through. I mean, these are really ingrained cultural wars, the way it's been for, thousands of years. Women in India actually held a position of significance until, I'm trying to think, it was late Middle Ages. They had a lot of control over their own life and respect. And then I can't remember the exact thing that happened. Something happened and they kind of started going downhill from there. But yeah, like, I mean, all I had to do was read articles and watch interviews with widows today. And I was able to put their own experiences into this book with Bimla. And then I took some of the experiences that Ramabai's widows had, and I gave some of the widows in this book those experiences as well. For instance, there is a scene where Ramabai talks about one of her girls is sent to the segregation camp and she's raped in the camp, which happened a lot. There was no oversight over these segregation camps, and widows, because they were considered less than human, you could do whatever you want with them. So she was raped and then she disappeared. And so I put that in the book just because I guess I feel like as a writer, it's my way of honoring people. Like, I can honor this woman. She has no name. I mean, she had a name. We don't know her name. Her name isn't told to us, but she had a story. And I just want to honor that woman who was so degraded and treated so cruelly, that she felt the need to take her own life. I just wanted to honor her in some way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of responsibility that as writers, if you're going to write about a topic like this, you do need to be careful, obviously, and be culturally sensitive, but also be aware of, I can see in the comments here, this is an education for a lot of people. A lot of people who are watching didn't necessarily know this about this period of time or even about today. And so, obviously you want to portray things in a way that is going to be, truth telling, but also, as you say, honor people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I get nervous every time I write a book set in India because I feel a responsibility. Like I'm not Indian, and I want to reflect the love I have for this country. But I write books about serious topics and about serious issues that I hope are still relevant today. And so I run everything by my sensitivity reader. I just want to make sure that everything I write is honoring, and even though we do have to, every country has its dark moments and its dark spots, right? And so I'm always going to be writing about those things wherever my books are set. But I just want to make sure that I write in a way that is as honest to the research as I've done that I can find. And I know I get things wrong, right? I mean, all historical authors, either we choose to change something or we just don't know, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a responsibility, but yeah, I know I get things wrong, but I hope that what comes across is my heart for this country and how much I love this country.
One of the things that struck me with this book was, of course, the parallels between the condition of women today and in this period of time you're writing about. And I don't think you can read a book about a plague or a pandemic without thinking about what's going on right now as well. So were you starting out with this idea during the pandemic and deciding to write a book about a city being struck by the bubonic plague, or did that come about serendipitous?
Yeah, it was all luck. No, I had pitched this book years and years ago, right? When I went to Hubboard. And so I planned my novels, I plot them all like to the greatest degree possible. Every scene is planned. And so I had planned this book and plotted this book months and months before anyone had heard of COVID.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was nuts. And then we went to Toronto was it late February? We went to Toronto and we came home and I started writing the book on the trip home from Toronto because that was right after we had gone to the George Eastman Museum. And so on the drive home, I started writing this book. I had everything planned. And then like 2 weeks later, life was upside down and there was this pandemic sweeping the world. And so I'm trying to write this book and all these things, there's a lot of parallels between how things were handled then and how things were handled with us at the beginning of the pandemic. And I kind of was like, what is going on? I'm in like the Twilight Zone. Every time I write something, it actually happens in real life. And Yeah, it was hard. I mean, first of all, it was hard to write during the pandemic. And anybody who has created anything during the beginning of pandemic, like kudos to you because it was hard to do that. I mean, nobody knew up from down at that point what was going on and what was happening. All of a sudden, all of my kids were like home. I'd sent my 9-year-old to school, she was in IP. And so I sent her to school. All of a sudden she was home. My littlest was home. I had my 2 oldest there. My husband was home. I was like, I can't write in this. It's like a farm.
A lot of people in one house.
A lot of it. And my husband's grandmother lives with us, so she was home from the senior center every day. And so I was dealing with that and then trying to write a book about a plague during a pandemic. It was interesting. It was definitely interesting. And then I think I sent my editor an email at one point. I was like, I don't know if people are going to want to read this. Like, maybe it's too close to home. I don't know. And she's like, well, I think by that point we'll be like far enough away. I'm like, I don't think we are.
As I said, there are definitely moments where, I was reading through the book and I thought that feels very familiar. And then there were also things that were just fascinating because I think one of the things that I associate, of course, so strongly with the plague is the Middle Ages. And so I don't necessarily think about this having been something that happened in the 19th century. So would you be able to give a bit more context about sort of in this city, in this time, what were people dealing with and how did they deal with it as well?
Yeah. So the bubonic plague is extremely deadly. There's the 3 types. 50% of people die from the bubonic plague, and then it can either turn into septicemic plague or it starts out as septicemic plague. Almost everyone dies from that. And then there's pneumonic plague, which it's 100% deadly. And even today, if you get it, and if you don't get treated within the first day, you'll die. Thankfully, it's not very common. You do hear cases every once in a while, like cropping up in Colorado and stuff, where people get bubonic plague. But it's crazy, like from I don't know, like rats and farm animals, and people usually will touch their dog or cat who had died and pick it up, and then they touch the infected flesh and then they can know. It's very rare though, thank God, because it's a horrible disease. And it completely decimated Pune. It was really bad, in particular in Pune. So when I'm trying to think, I think it might have started in Mumbai. It seems like everything started in Bombay. But I think it started around Bombay, and then it kind of just spread to different parts of India. And when it first came, when it first happened, the colonial government was kind of loath to deal with it because they were just coming off this famine, they were in the middle of this famine, coming at the tail end of the famine, and the country was just really hurting, economically. And so they just ignored it at first. And there was also, there's a lot of symptoms that crossover between typhus and plague. And so people maybe didn't know what it was, other respiratory illnesses. And so they ignored it. And then when they realized what it was and what a big deal it was going to be, they were forced to deal with it in a way that was perhaps really heavy handed.
Yeah.
And and there was a dichotomy between how it affected and was dealt with the European class, with the military, with the British who were there, with the very wealthy, and then with just the average person and the people who were poor. They were treated very differently. It was more common in the areas of the city that were crowded, and the communities were called pets. And so there were certain pets where people were very poor and there was overcrowding, and just the way their houses were made just allowed for a lot of rats and fleas and bugs, and then it passed between person to person if it was septicemic or pneumonic. Bubonic plague actually you can't really catch it from another person unless you touch their infected flesh. But pneumonic, so it's not, and that's why the more upper class areas didn't struggle with it as much, because the bubonic plague, it wasn't like COVID where you could cough and get it, somebody would get it, right? Yeah, unless it was pneumonic, but that was a lot more rare. So pneumonic plague you could pass person to person because it's spread through droplets. And so there's just a difference in the way it was treated, and people were really angry, and I think rightly angry. There was not a lot of sensitivity given to the culture or the religion.
That was something very striking, I think, in your descriptions of going into a home.
Yeah. So the plague commissioner of Pune at the time, he basically was there was this act that was passed that basically gave the British carte blanche to do whatever they needed to do to stop it. And clearly it needed to be stopped. It was an extremely deadly illness, right? It was spreading across the country. But the way they handled it was not at all sensitive to the people who were most at risk for dying of it and contracting it. And so these, soldiers would just go into people's houses. They would go into their kitchens and the rooms where they worshipped, which if you're not Hindu, you weren't supposed to go in those rooms. They didn't care. Men would examine women, which also wasn't acceptable in any way. There was a lot of accusations of impropriety and sexual assault with these soldiers. And there were British soldiers, and then there were Indian soldiers who kind of worked with them. And so they would, if there was a case of so people didn't trust the medical establishment at the time, and they didn't trust the British, which is fair, right? And so they didn't want to go to the plague hospital. They thought that people were being killed there. They didn't want to go to the segregation camps because it was overcrowded and filthy, and there was no management. It was really poorly run. And they didn't want to be separated from their family members. They didn't want the British to take their family members' bodies. They weren't going to treat them in a way that they weren't going to handle the bodies in a way that they would have wanted them handled from a religious perspective. So there was a lot of distrust, and people would hide their sick, hide them in holes under the ground and hide them in rooms and under furniture. And then these soldiers would come in and just tramp all over their houses and take these people, bring them to the plague hospital, and then they would never see them again, because more likely than not, they were going to die. There wasn't a lot of treatment, right? Linseed packs was the best they had, So, and they thought these people were being killed. They thought their relatives were being killed in these hospitals. And so, there was a lot of resistance. And I think it was W.C. Rand was his name. He was a plague commissioner. He was coming home from a Jubilee celebration one night, and there was 3 brothers who Chapakar, and they shot him. They killed him because of this kind of simmering anger, and that was a turning point. The brothers were arrested and were prosecuted, and I think eventually they were killed. But that kind of triggered an understanding that, hey, maybe we're doing this wrong. Maybe we need to change the way we're doing this. And it was a very slow process, but they started handling in a much more respectful way. And then there was a vaccine that came out around that time as well. And it was a Ukrainian bacteriologist, and he was kind of recruited to create this vaccine. And he started with people in prisons, testing it on them. And then it started spreading, and people were able to get the vaccine.
What were you drawing on in terms of sources for writing about, really, really vividly? And again, drawing on some very, very present parallels with what's going on today. What sources were you able to draw on for the research for that part of the book?
So there's actually a lot of literature written during that time. There were a lot of British doctors who, wrote for medical journals back in England about what was going on. In particular, and I think this is such a fun little thing, the woman who, I think she was on a plague committee, and she kind of helped oversee the plague hospital. Her name was Marion Hunt, which she was a doctor, which is kind of incredible to have such a position, as a woman at the time. But she wrote a lot about the plague and the treatment. And there was there's a library in California, at some California university. I did research. I did the research 2 years ago for this. Yeah, but there was a library. It's hard to remember details.
It's taken so much research that you think at the end of the book, where did I start and where did I end with all of it?
I know. And when I'm done writing a book, it just kind of all drains out of my head. I just fill it with new research or something else. And so I'm trying to recall details, but it was a long time ago. And I have so many kids that there's really not a lot left in there.
They take us
at the end of the day, I'm just completely, but there was, and this was kind of a cool thing to stumble upon. It's in my Pinterest board that I make public once my book publishes. But there's a research library in some university in California, I believe it is. And there was a photographer at the time who cataloged all the hospitals and the segregation camps in Pune during this time. And I feel like the best way to do research, even more than reading, is looking at photographs, which is kind of a fun connection with Bessie, but is looking at photographs, because you see things that wouldn't be written about, and you're able to kind of get a sense of what was going on. And so I was able to look through, so many 100 pictures or whatnot and able to see these poor patients and how they were treated and how things were lined up and arranged. And so I looked at a lot of pictures, and then I read a lot of these reports by these medical doctors at the time.
When you sit down and start writing a book, do you start with the research, or do you start from a different place?
I do like overarching research. And so I have subjects I know I'm going to need to understand. And so I'll read books, and I might have a book on the plague upstairs too. I have so many books. I'll read the books, I'll take notes. I will save things in Pinterest and in like folders on my computer I can't find later on when I need them. I have like running notes like on Microsoft Word, and then eventually I'll print it up and highlight things that are most important.
Yes. Yeah.
Because you don't know what you need when you start researching. You don't really know what you're really going to need, so you just kind of do this general research. And then as I'm writing, I will research as I'm writing. And it extends the time it takes to write these books. But I don't ever like, I've done this before. I don't want to skip something, be like, oh, just fill this in later, and then write as though it's happened, and then have to like rewrite the entire book because of it.
It's hard, especially when you realize it's, and I learned that lesson once where I thought I had nailed down a specific date and made the date that I chose made something impossible for a full year. So I ended up having to move the entire timeline of a book, which I was writing about World War II at the time. And it just has a knock-on effect with absolutely everything. Because you're talking about, conscription and what was happening during the war, if people were or were not experiencing bombings, all of these different things. It was a massive, massive headache. So I've learned to get at least those details down as early as I can.
Yeah. It's you don't want to do that. You don't want to rewrite a book. It just changes everything. It's like a domino effect. Yeah. And so so like if I say write a scene in an hour, it'll make it like 3 hours, so, but then I figure it saves time that at the end of the book, I don't have to go back and like spend all this time, reworking everything. So that's how I manage the research. I tend to get really involved in the research, and then I find it really interesting. So my biggest issue is not spending my time researching instead of writing, which is my job.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky one. And I'm curious because I'm very nosy and love asking everybody this question. What does your writing day look like? Especially if you're sort of trying to keep yourself on track.
Yeah. So right now I mainly write on the weekends because I homeschool during the day, and I have my own editing clients. I need to get those things done. And so it's really hard. And I'm not the type of person who could write like, everybody's just write 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Like I can't do that. Right. I need a set like 2 or 3 hours to write. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to get into it. So mainly I write on the weekends on Saturday, and then Sunday I'll write 2 or 3 scenes when my husband takes the kids out of my house and does things with them. And then I might get a scene in during the week if he takes them to jujitsu or, takes him to the park or whatever. He's so extremely supportive. Like even before I had a publishing contract, he's always treated me like I was a success. So like the opposite of Gussie, I've always had a great support system, which really makes this possible, because if he weren't as, supportive, I don't know that I could have managed this, because it's so time consuming. But yeah, sometimes I might get a scene written off during the day. And then during the day, while I'll handle like marketing and social media and emailing and arranging things, and I'll do those things that don't require my undivided attention.
I know you mentioned that you plot out as many aspects of the book as you can before you start. Is that before you start writing that, or are you plotting and simultaneously writing as well?
No, I plot out everything before I start writing. So I know I just don't have time to sit here and be like, what am I doing today? Right. So at least I have my index card. Like I plot out every scene on an index card, and I put them in order. And like I have everything organized, like plot points and climax and all that stuff organized in different color cards. And then I just put them in a pile, and I go to this website that kind of like spits it out as a synopsis kind of. And I just pick up a card, look at my synopsis, and I sit down and I start writing because I know what's going to happen.
Does that mean that you have to have your characters really set in stone before you start that process, or are they developing throughout that first draft while you're also following those index cards?
No, I don't. I leave room for flexibility. I don't plot really spiritual arcs or emotional arcs. I kind of know where they're starting, and I know a little bit about their personalities. I don't do like personality testing or anything like that. I might have an idea of their like Myers-Briggs, just I'm kind of a Myers-Briggs. I love it. I love MBTI, but I might have an idea of what maybe they are, a little bit of an idea of their personality, but I don't over plan that, because I feel like it's more authentic to just let that develop in an organic way. I don't want to force my vision on the characters. I'll force my vision on the plot, but I'm not forcing it on the characters.
We had a question earlier about whether your books need to be read in publication order or whether they're standalone.
Yeah, they're all standalone. So you'll see online the Kindle versions are called the Dreams of India series, but they're not placed one on top of another. There's a mention of my first characters in every word unsaid, but you wouldn't even know it unless you had read it.
Right. It's like an Easter egg for people who have read
Yeah,
the first
yeah,
book. Wonderful.
yeah.
Have you found that writing those books has been a very different experience book to book, or at this point do you feel like you have the process down a bit?
Oh, it's so different. I don't know if I'm ever going to get it. I really don't.
I don't think I am either. So,
No, it's so yeah, it's so different. My first book was super easy to write. I think because I didn't have a contract and I didn't have pressure, and I just kind of could do whatever I want in whatever order and take however long I wanted to. I knew I wasn't going to be disappointing anyone, And then the next book was so personal to me. It had a lot of my own personal struggles and things in there. And every word inside was just such a bear to write. I mean, I felt like I was pulling my teeth out every time I sat down at the computer, and I would get so frustrated. I can't tell you how many times I called my friend crying. Like, I can't do this. I'm going to send back my advance. And she's like,
That's the threat that every author doesn't want to ever have to think about is have to send back the advance, cancel the contract.
I know I have to do this, but I don't think I can. And my editor's going to laugh herself out of the sea. That's what I always picture. That's what I always heard. I respect my editor so much. She's an amazing, amazing editor. She's an amazing person. She's so brilliant. And I'm always afraid she's going to laugh at me. She never has, but I'm always afraid of it.
No, I understand. I think that's a little bit of healthy fear, especially during the first draft process. Do you enjoy the editing process of writing as well, or are you more
I
of a
enjoy I enjoy line edits. I despise like sub edits with an unholy passion because it's like the same thing. Like, because I'm a plotter and I have everything planned, I write in order. I write from scene 1 to the very last scene 63 or whatever it is, right? I don't write. I know authors who write out of order. I'm like, how do you do that? How do you keep all the loose ends tied together and keep plot holes out of there? And so with sub edits, you get them and you're like, okay, how am I going to deal with this in a logical way? Like, because it's just all encompassing, and you change one thing and then you have to like change all these other things, and like you have to like dig through your manuscript and try to like control F to find different words, and I really don't like that. I find it very stressful. Usually I make my husband take a week or two off of work so I can bury myself in my room and I don't let anyone in, and I just hide in there with tea and lots of cookies and
down?
fries.
I can understand that definitely.
But I do love line edits. That's my favorite part, when you can make everything all shiny. And one of my favorite things about writing is just writing beautiful prose, like lyrical, like poetry, like that type of thing. Finding something like, oh, I can make this better. That's my favorite thing.
It is, and it really shows through with the book. I think, not only your affection for India, but also your affection for describing the countryside, describing, what you would see if you're walking through a market and all of those things. It is very lyrical and very cinematic too, I think.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope that when readers read my books, that they're for a moment transported. I love the first book I remember this happening to me was The Secret Garden, which is still one of my favorite books. And I got it when I was 10. I love it so much. I still read it almost every year. And I read it to my kids now. And my mom walking in my room while when I was reading it, walking in my room and like, Kim, and me like blinking at her like, wait, where am I? Like, that's my goal with every book. I want readers to feel that. Even if they, don't love my characters, which is, sometimes they're really annoying. Even if they don't love my characters, I want them to feel that they've been transported.
Well, characters need something to grow into. So I think you always want to go along for a ride with a character, I think, and end the book in a different place than they were before. And I think absolutely everybody learns something in this book, and everybody becomes a slightly different person. In some cases, a dramatically different person, but yeah, I think along the way, there's some beautiful things to look at and some beautiful things to read about too.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I would love to ask you a couple of nosy questions about reading, if you don't mind. Have you always been a really big reader? I know you mentioned The Secret Garden.
Yeah, I have. I started reading when I was 4, and I don't really remember how I started reading. My oldest was like, my oldest daughter, she's 17, almost 17 now, but she I didn't really teach her. I taught her alphabet, and then she started reading. It was like this magical thing. Right? I don't know. I know for a fact it doesn't happen for everybody because my other kids aren't like that. But I started reading when I was really young, and I have always loved books. I mean, I was the nerd in 10th grade, walking into the lunchroom and ignoring my friends and sitting by myself and reading War and Peace. Okay, like I thought it was super cool to walk around with this really thick book. Like people thought I was the weirdest person. I probably was kind of weird. But yeah, I've always loved reading. And I started writing when I was really young. I wrote my first story when I was 11. It was about an inchworm who travels to a different place and grows along the way. Right? That hasn't changed
Oh,
much. And yeah, I've been writing ever since. I entered every writing contest I could in high school. My Christmas gift when I was 10th grade was a typewriter. Like, I'm aging myself, right? We didn't have a computer. But then I would just sit in my room typing away, writing my stories. But yeah, books are really important to us. My husband is like, Kim, we don't have any more. We live in a very small house, and he's like, there's stacks of books everywhere. In fact, this table behind you, I cleaned off right before I got on because there are stacks of books everywhere. Because I don't know, I love reading.
I think books make a home very cozy and very home-like. So I fully endorse that. Absolutely.
And then with children's books, they have these gorgeous illustrations, and I
Do.
can't resist. I cannot resist buying a beautifully illustrated children's book.
They're wonderful, and I think there's something really special about them. My parents still have quite a few of my old, the really beautiful editions of the children's books, and I love going through them. I love paging through them and seeing, you know, all the different things. It's very nostalgic, but also I think the illustration is just wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of nice as a homeschooler because we have more time. You know, I still read aloud to my kids, even my teenagers, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Well, I would love to hear about some of the things that you've read recently and you've been enjoying. If you don't
Yeah,
mind giving us some recommendations.
yeah. So I am reading this beautiful book right now.
Thank you.
It is. I was telling Julie, you guys, I was telling Julie, it is so incredibly charming, and it reminds me a little bit of The Secret Garden, just like this magical, like
I,
floral sort of thing. I
that's
love
very
it.
nice to hear. I loved The Secret Garden when I was a little girl, so I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm not just saying that. I really am enjoying that book. It's kind of an escape. Life is so hectic and chaotic for me right now, and I don't have hours and hours to read anymore like I used to. I wish I did. So I keep different books and different like I'll keep one in the car and one next to my bed and one on the kitchen counter. You know, and if I'm like I don't know, watching over my daughter's math, I'll just like open up a book and read a scene, you know, while she's doing that, or sitting in the car, you know, my husband's driving. I don't read while I'm driving, but while he's driving, I'll like read, you know, on the way to see my person. So I'm reading that and it's beautiful. I'm reading a book called The Kitchen Front.
I don't
I
know.
don't Yeah, I just started that. It's a clever idea. I'm enjoying that. And then I just finished the book. It's probably one of my favorite books of the year. It's called Miss Benson's Beetle. Have you
Wonderful.
heard of that one?
I haven't. No, this is fantastic. I love getting recommendations. So
I wrote the name of the author down because I can't ever remember. Rachel Joyce.
Rachel
Yeah,
Joyce. Okay.
Rachel Joyce. And so it's about this woman who travels. I love books about people that travel. I guess I just love books about people that travel. And it's a redemptive story. It's a really a love story between these two women, not in a romantic way, but just a friendship way. And they kind of learn about each other and learn to love each other. And they're kind of forced in these. There's all these hijinks and funny things that happen, but I wouldn't say it's not a funny book, but she's a funny writer. You know, like some of the dialogue is so witty, and she's British. I believe she's British, which always makes them funnier, I think.
Very good.
Yeah, super clever, like dialogue, and it's a beautiful book. I was completely captivated by it. In fact, I read it and I turned around and reread it again. It was a
Oh,
great
that's
book.
a wonderful recommendation.
And I don't often read books a second time. Actually, I never read books a second time. And I just loved it so much. It was great. I bought it on Kindle. I went ahead and put it on my Amazon card to buy the paperback. I just want to
Wonderful.
have it.
Oh, fantastic. I'll have to find that. Well, I want to make sure and get a chance to ask you about what you're working on next. So we can kind of not only tease this book that's just come out, but also any upcoming projects that we should keep an eye out for.
Yeah, so I'm super excited about the book I'm working on now. I'm right in the middle of the draft. It's not going to come out until March of 2023. So there's going to be a
Mhm.
little gap between. I was putting one out every 9 months, but COVID just kind of threw everything for a loop. So
Doesn't matter.
everything
Yeah.
affects everything. So there'll be a little bit of a gap between Every Word Unsaid and this next book that does not have a title, but it's fun. It's set in mainly New York, which I'm excited about because it's a coming home for me
Yes.
from New York. Yeah, I love the state. And so it's fun just to set a book in my home state. And it is about, this is so fun. I can't even wait to say it. It's about a circus strong woman. And I just adore her. Like I adore her. Yeah. She is like 6 foot tall, not typically like the type of heroine you would find in a novel. It's from women's fiction. There's a lot of romance. It is a marriage of convenience story, so there's some romance. Well, there's actually a lot of romance, but it's
Love
still,
American Convenience. Yep.
yeah, me too. It skews women's fiction. It's a story about a mother and a daughter who have been estranged, and it's my first book that's dual POV, which is kind of fun too. So
Wonderful.
it's the mother and the daughter. And I love this character. She actually doesn't, she has a name, but I'm changing it, so I can't say her name. So that's how it's going to be. And so I'm like, this name's not working for her. So I'm not sure what I'm going to turn that into, but she's a fun, complex character. She's not what you would think she would be. And
Okay.
really there's an exploration of like femininity and strength and what makes women strong, like physically strong, internally strong, like what makes us strong, our strong relationships. And so I kind of try to explore all of that.
This sounds wonderful. Well, if we want to keep an eye out for that, and obviously also check out your books that are already published, where would people find you online?
You can find me at kimberlyduffy.com, and I have a newsletter. I try to send one out every month, but it doesn't usually happen that way. It's usually every 2 to 3 months, where I try to keep people updated. And then I'm very active on Instagram, so it's author Kimberly Duffy. I have a Facebook page, the same name, but I'm not on there very much because I don't really get any, like I don't get any traction in it. But I am very active on Instagram. I do stories all the time and reels, and I think it's a fun place to be.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking with us, and this has just been fantastic. So I can't wait for people to read the book, and have, I'm sure, lots and lots of questions for you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to chat.
Of course. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next week.